Hello, and welcome to Greywood Gardening. The very first daffodils of the year have begun to bloom. These are Narcissus tete-a-tete. It's a miniature yellow daffodil that has multiple blossoms on each stem, and it looks absolutely fantastic when planted in clumps. In fact, these have even managed to win over Mrs. Greywood, who's normally not a very big fan of daffodils. Unfortunately, it's not all good news when it comes to the spring bulbs. I had planted several hundred tulip bulbs that were all coming up, and they have all been eaten by the deer. On top of that, the deer have also eaten all the crocus that were planted over around the apple tree, although we did get to enjoy several dozen blooming before they got eaten. It's not all bad news, though. We do have more tulip bulbs planted in pots that are clearly close enough to the house that the deer have left them alone, so once those start to bloom, we can set those out wherever we want. Well, on this video, we're going to check in on the seedlings that we planted last time because it's time to thin them. Then we're going to head out back. We're going to work on clearing a space to be a play area for our 2-year-old daughter. But first, let's head over to the cottage garden and let's talk about the master plan. This garden is at the very top of our driveway. It's visible from the front of the house, and it's going to be our cottage garden. And this is the master plan for the cottage garden for this year. Now, our cottage garden is an informal garden that's very densely planted and doesn't usually have a particular color scheme, and the goal is really to have things blooming all of the time. Now, for the structure of the garden, we are going to have a path coming through, which is currently marked with these stones is where it's going to be, but we'll have some sort of stone walkway going through the middle and heading out the far end. This whole front area of the garden is a giant patch of decorative grass. I'm not sure what kind. We don't want it here, but it was so attractive, particularly in the fall, that we didn't want to just dig it up and throw it out. So what we're going to do is wait until it just starts to grow, which is the right time to move or divide grasses. For us, that's probably going to be around the middle of May. Then we'll dig it up, we'll find a new home for it, and have this big area in full sun to plant with whatever we'd like. Now, just as we were moving in at the end of last summer, my father brought us a bunch of plants that he had rescued from a neighbor. He brought a bunch of bearded iris, which we planted. Unfortunately, the deer ate them. They're coming back anyway, and the deer are starting to eat them again. We also have a couple of chrysanthemums. You can see the new leaves coming up through the leaf litter here. And now at this point, I could come and carefully clear all of the dead leaves away, but we're still getting below freezing at night, and this leaf litter is sort of nature's way of insulating the tender new growth of the plants. And I think this is an important thing that you learn with experience in gardening, is building up a list of plausible sounding excuses not to do work. We did get some plants in the ground last fall. We got some bulbs in, mostly a bunch of allium. We got some purple sensation allium and then a couple very, very large allium. Those all appear to be coming up. I also snuck in a handful of daffodils when Mrs. Greywood wasn't looking, and those are starting to come up now and bloom. In terms of what flowers we actually want to plant, we're gonna have to be pretty fluid with that. Our plan was to go to the garden centers and buy mature perennials that we could get planted and would even bloom this year. We don't even know right now whether any of the garden centers are going to be open or should be open. And from what I can see, everything we can order online is very small first-year starts, so it's not anything that'll bloom this year at all. While we don't have a hard and fast list of what plants we want to grow, some of the stuff that we would like includes having columbine, lupine, including the native versions of both of those, as well as some of the non-natives, having bee balm, asters, chrysanthemums, coneflowers, purple coneflowers and other colors of echinacea, black-eyed Susans, Shasta daisies, prairie blazing star, delphinium, and a whole bunch more, as well as mixing some annuals in with perennials. Honestly, the list that we came up with at one point in the winter is more plants than you could possibly fit in the space. So we'll start getting what we can get and let it expand over time and see what it turns into. Well, so the master plan for this space is pretty tentative. We know what the structure is going to be, path, maybe a fence, shady area, sunny area, cottage garden, but I'm going to be very, very excited to see what this space looks like at the end of the year, and even more excited to see what it looks like next year. The peppers we planted last time are doing great. In fact, it's time to thin them. We want only one plant in each of these cells, and it looks like we had almost perfect germination, so most of them have 2 plants in them. Now, when it comes time to thin your seedlings to just 1 seedling per cell or per pot, the best way to do it is to actually use like small scissors or clippers and actually clip the plant off rather than pulling it out. By the time the plants get to this size or even larger, they have a decent root system, and the roots of the 2 plants can actually intertwine. So when you pull one out, you might pull both of them out, or you might rip up and damage the roots of the plant that you're trying to keep and grow. And when choosing which one to cut, the decision shouldn't be very difficult. Obviously, you want to keep the biggest and strongest seedling in each cell. If you got 2 seedlings that are almost the same, I usually like to try to keep whichever one is closest to the center of the pot. The important thing is it should never be a really hard decision. If it's a really tough call, just cut one of them and move on with your life. It's not worth wasting the time. So for example, right here, I've got 2 seedlings. They're really both about the same size and positioning. So I'm just going to clip one and move on. This one, I've got one that's slightly bigger than the other, but this one kind of has a damaged leaf. So what the heck, I'm going to take that one off. Now, a lot of people ask, when is the right time to thin the seedlings? The answer is when your seedlings get their first set of true leaves, which is the second set of leaves that they get. Most seedlings, when they first grow, their first set of leaves, which are called the cotyledons, don't actually look like the final leaves of the final plant. And the next set of leaves that come are called the first set of true leaves. So when your seedlings have their first set of true leaves, that's a great time to thin them, and you can thin them any time before that, including when they very first pop up. In fact, if you get them within a few days of them sprouting, you can just grab them and yank them out because there aren't really any root system there to damage. All right, so these are all set now to continue growing. I'm going to keep watering them daily, but I am going to let the potting soil now get dry in between waterings, which when I wanted the seeds to germinate, I was making sure it was moist all the time. And I'm going to keep it under the grow lights, and after several more weeks, these should be big enough that we'll need to pot them up into larger pots. All right. Our first big project of the spring is to clear out an area behind me that we can build into a play area for our 2-year-old daughter. The plan is to clear an area between that tree and that tree that extends back about 20 or 25 feet. Then we'll fill the area with wood chips and use that to level it somewhat. Hopefully that'll take a big chunk out of the wood chip pile. Now the problem is that area is filled with fallen branches, rotting logs, standing deadwood, and a whole bunch of thorny brambles, which is mostly wild raspberries and buckthorn. Now I think the place to start is going to be with clearing those brambles to make it a little easier to work back there. And here I think we're going to be fortunate that because of our sandy ground, I'm guessing we'll be able to just pull those things straight out by the roots and not have to worry about anything regrowing and not have to worry about digging them out. All right, it looks like it works. It's not a lot of fun. It's going to be a lot of bending, but might as well get started. Well, that was not a lot of fun. Maybe we'll call this the worst project of the year, and every other project for the rest of the year will be easier than this one. Well, I think it's probably time now to get started on some of the dead wood. All right, well, all of that wood was rotting, so I just tossed it a little bit further into the woods where it can rot in peace. But to deal with the standing dead wood, we're gonna need a little bit more powerful tools. Let's get started. Here's a pro tip for you. Always sharpen your chainsaw before you put it away. That way, the next time you need it, it's ready to go. I am obviously not a pro, and so here I sit. Okay, I think that is a pretty good day's work. All that's left is to gather up the firewood and put it into storage, but we can hold off till tomorrow on that. And then we begin phase 2 of the project, which honestly is the hard part. Well, this is spring in Minnesota. Yesterday it was beautiful and in the upper 50s, and today we're supposed to get up to 6 inches of snow. So I think I'll be working inside for the next few days until all the snow melts away. All right, well, we had 3 days of snow, but everything is melted now, things are warming back up, and now I have to start the hardest part of the play area project, which is I made the terrible mistake of suggesting to Mrs. Greywood that, hey, wouldn't it look great if we lined the play area with some of these giant logs we have stacked up, and that would be a way to use up some of the logs. She's now in love with that idea, and I don't have the first clue how I'm going to move these. But the first thing I have to do is actually come in here with a chainsaw, trim up the ends of some of these logs, and then we'll see whether or not it's possible for me to move them. Let's get started.
Sit here and eat your snack. Oh, I'm gonna have to brush you down before we go in. Oh.
All right, well that honestly was easier than it had any right to be. Using that bottom row of logs on the log pile as like a loading dock to roll the logs onto the top of the bucket really just made what could have been a pretty awful task a surprisingly easy one. We're not entirely done yet because this end of the play area is significantly lower than the far end, so we're going to need to put a second level of logs here. So what I'm going to do is fill the area with wood chips, and then I'll set the second layer of logs on top of the wood chips just inside of the first log. And then we can fill things up and level off from there. Now, filling the area with wood chips, that's the fun job, and that's an easy job. So let's get started. All right, I think we've gone about as far as we can today. Mrs. Greywood was just starting to rake out the wood chips, and we discovered that a lot of the wood chips in the pile are actually frozen. So we have these small hunks and giant hunks of frozen wood chips all over the area. So we're gonna have to wait a few days for everything to thaw out and dry before we can spread the wood chips again, then bring in the new logs, then bring in another load of wood chips, and then respread it. So it looks like this might be a chore that's gonna move on to the next episode. I've just had a terrible thought. Those 2 dead trees that I cut down, I just realized I could have just cut the branches off and rolled them to the side, and those could have been 2 of the sides of the play area. Rather than going through all the work to cut them up into pieces, haul all the rounds away, stack them, and then wrestle with more of the logs off of the log pile. Yeah, that could have been a good bit of work saved. Well, that's all I have for this video. I did just get an email from Eden Brothers that they've shipped some bare rootstock that I barely remember ordering. So we'll have that and more next time. But until then, happy gardening. Well, it looks like it works. It's not going to be a lot of fun. It's a lot of bending and tugging, but that sounds a little dirty. Even more excited. see what it looks like next year. Oh, my ass. Woo.